Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first ever Northeast Aquatic Plant Management Society Winter Webinar Series. Today we'll be talking about watercraft inspection steward programs. But before we get started on the presentation, we have a little housekeeping to do. And slides are not moving. Let's see. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so I just wanted to help you to become more familiar with the Northeast Aquatic Plant Management Society. We're a society whose mission is to assist in the management of aquatic vegetation, to provide for scientific and educational advances of members, encourage scientific research in all facets of aquatic plant management, to promote exchange of information among members, and to extend and develop understanding in this discipline. Our members are from academia, government agencies, private consulting firms, herbicide manufacturers, and lake associations. We host annual meetings and we support students with scholarships. If you'd like to learn more about us and who are the members of our board of directors, please go to www.neapms.org. Okay, if we could get to the next slide, that'd be great. All right, this is proving to be a bit more challenging than anticipated. Okay. There we go. All right. So more about this webinar. The Watercraft Inspection Steward Program webinar is our first webinar. The webinar is set to run from 1:30 to 3 o'clock. There will be 3 20-minute presentations with a block of 25 minutes at the end for questions and discussion with presenters. This webinar will be recorded and it will be shared via link on the NEAPMS website. Our presentation and their authors. First presentation is New Jersey's Boat Steward Program with Heather Desco from New Jersey Water Supply Authority. Second presentation is the Boater Behavior Survey with Tim Campbell from Wisconsin Sea Grant. And the third presentation is Great Lakes AIS Landing Blitz with Ceci Weibert from the Great Lakes Aquatic Nuisance Species Panel. And I encourage folks, we'll go from there. So the first presentation, I'd like to introduce Heather Desco. She is a senior watershed protection specialist for the New Jersey Water Supply Authority. She joined the authority in 2009 after serving as an AmeriCorps New Jersey watershed ambassador. Heather manages the authority's water monitoring programs, aquatic invasive species, and harmful algal bloom projects, and the, river-friendly business and school certification programs. She's a member of the North American Lake Management Society, Mid-Atlantic Panel on Aquatic Invasive Species, the New Jersey Water Monitoring Council, is on the board of directors of the Northeast Aquatic Plant Management Society. Heather received both her BA in Environmental Science and MA in Energy and Environmental Analysis from Boston University. Take it away, Heather.
Thanks so much, Kathy. And thank you so much to Northeast APMS for this opportunity to talk about our boat steward program in New Jersey. All right, you can see my screen just fine. I am going to turn off my webcam just for complete focus on the slides. So just a quick rundown of what I'm going to cover today, a little bit about who we are as an organization, an introduction to aquatic invasive species and the need for such a program. Then I'll provide some details about our steward program and include some data and results. I'll finish up with next steps for moving forward and relevant acknowledgements and contact info. The New Jersey Water Supply Authority was created in 1981 to operate and maintain water supply facilities owned by the state of New Jersey. We provide raw water in the Raritan and Manasquan water supply systems, selling water to water purveyors, both private and municipal, who treat the water and distribute to end user customers who are getting it from their taps. The Raritan system includes Round Valley and Spruce Run reservoirs, which are the first and third largest reservoirs in New Jersey, respectively, and the Delaware and Raritan Canal, which is a 60-mile long historic barge canal turned water supply transmission complex, and the Manasquan water supply system, which includes the Manasquan Reservoir, a small but mighty 4 billion gallon reservoir in the Atlantic coastal plain, together to provide water for over 2 million people in New Jersey. I'm part of the Watershed Protection Division, which does a little bit of everything, including watershed planning, water monitoring, restoration, and stormwater pollution prevention and outreach. One of those tasks under watershed protection includes managing and monitoring aquatic invasive species that can impact water supply operations. Just as a quick refresher for you on invasive species, they are non-native species that can cause environmental or human harm. They can outcompete native indigenous species. They are hard to eradicate and they easily establish. Aquatic invasive species can run the gamut from plants and mollusks to fish and mammals and pathogens and disease. They do include wetland and water obligate species. So why are aquatic invasive species bad in a new environment? They can exclude or replace native aquatic plants or animals. They can disrupt the food web and subsequent trophic levels. They can result in water quality impairments like low dissolved oxygen. They can impact recreation, like the declining quality of boating or fisheries. And they can damage or impair critical infrastructure like water supply, hydroelectric, and transportation. In short, aquatic invasive species affects everyone directly or indirectly, but they don't always get the top billing that some of the other invasive species get. So with that, hopefully it doesn't seem strange that a water supply organization is eager to take such an active response in managing aquatic invasive species. We've been monitoring and managing aquatic invasive species, predominantly plants, for a variety of reasons over the past several years. And that includes significant impacts to our water quantity with disruptions in flow in the canal, degraded water quality concerns like dissolved oxygen in an intake pond, as you can see on the top right, changes in nutrient loads when aquatic plants die off in the late fall, which can also exacerbate harmful algal blooms. And you can see there's Senesced hydrilla hiding underneath this hab that you can see here under this scum. So as a staple of any invasive species presentation, this graph shows the progression of time on the x-axis, cost in area infested on the y-axis, and the stages of management goals along the curve. As time passes from the point of introduction, down here with the blue arrow, to the inflection point of public awareness, eradication is possible because costs are lower and the area infested is small. As time progresses, you have to move more towards containment and long-term management as it becomes cost prohibitive and unreasonable to manage large infestations. This sets the stage for the need for a public outreach component to any emerging AIS eradication or containment effort. The goal is to shift that public awareness arrow to an earlier point on the timeline, like this. So to help shift that public awareness and to help educate and prevent the spread of AIS, the New Jersey Water Supply Authority looked to many Northeast states as models, especially New York, in developing a boat steward inspection program. The primary objectives for boat stewards are to inspect launching and retrieving boats for AIS fragments as a key pathway for AIS spread, to provide public education about AIS issues and prevention, and to collect data about boats and patron behaviors, and including AIS presence. These boat stewards program complement projects and objectives that we're trying to achieve as a water supply organization, while also forging partnerships with the organizations that manage the recreational side of things for our water bodies. At each of the authorities' water bodies that I mentioned, the recreation side is managed by a park entity. This allows for unique partnerships, and the stewards that we have are employed by the park partners. NJWSA worked with the Monmouth County Park System to launch our first boat steward program in 2019 at the Manasquan Reservoir. We had initiated a pilot herbicide program to manage hydrilla in the reservoir, and we wanted to complement that effort with education and prevention. We added the boat steward program at Spruce Run Recreation Area in 2021. Both Manasquan and Spruce Run each only have one boat launch ramp area. Spruce Run does have an additional car top launch that's near the ramp, so the steward has to walk back and forth between the two of those. The boat stewards also provide general park information, including updates on harmful algal blooms, which are recurrent and persistent at both of those reservoirs. So NJWSA provides funding for part-time seasonal employees at both of these locations. We are targeting weekends and holidays between Memorial Day and Labor Day. We know that the stewards are not at the launches at all hours that the launches are open. Spruce Run is open for boating 24/7, and Manasquan is open daily, typically from around sunrise to sundown. But we only have 3 steward days a week, so we know that we're not covering that entire time that the boat launch is open. And at this time, NJWSA currently funds 2 part-time stewards at Manasquan and 1 part-time steward at Spruce Run. Monmouth County Park has funded the other 2 days per week for a full-time seasonal position at Manasquan Reservoir. And those employees also have other duties around the park, including maintenance and other education. So having these different partners allows for flexibility on their end to manage the stewards however they best see fit for their needs. And with additional projects that we have at Manasquan, the stewards have also had the opportunity to participate in vegetation surveys and water quality monitoring with NJWSA staff. So the stewards are employed by the park partners. The stewards wear the uniform of the park partners, but the funding, training, equipment, materials are all provided by the New Jersey Water Supply Authority. So how does it actually work? The stewards are stationed at a boat launch, and they have a table with education information that you saw in that previous picture. They do provide verbal education as boaters are launching or retrieving their boats. Sometimes we know that the stewards are there when the boaters are coming back in after they've been out for an early morning of fishing. And the stewards are equipped with a tablet with a program called Survey 123, which is from Esri, from ArcGIS. That guides them through a series of questions about the boat, where the boat is coming from and going to, how long since it was last used, any cleaning procedures, and some general AIS awareness questions. Survey 123 populates this data into an ArcGIS online spreadsheet, which is viewable on a desktop. And the spreadsheet, you can export it and it's editable and provides some basic analysis capabilities. We can generate reports pretty easily just to see how things are going even after each weekend. And within the survey, there's a limited number of questions that are required, which does allow for the steward to gather the most important information, and then a boater can decline to answer some of the other questions, or if the boat launch is busy, then the steward can skip questions and just get the most important information. We also have developed we call it a fast survey for busy days, and especially when there are fishing tournaments. Those happen quite frequently at these water bodies. So we want to capture as many of those boats especially as possible. So just a quick overview of how our program is going. So I mentioned it's pretty young. We've had 3 seasons at Manasquan and 1 season at Spruce Run. And so over the course of those years, we've had 150 steward days with stewards at the launches, and they have logged 5,233 surveys. And out of those surveys, 6.5% of the boats arriving have had vegetation on them. And sometimes it's hard or nearly impossible to identify what is partially desiccated vegetation. But to our knowledge at this point, our stewards have not intercepted any vegetation or organism that was not already present in the receiving water body. They have captured invasive species that have come in, especially from other states, but those species have already been present in those water bodies at that time. Our stewards also survey boats that are leaving the water body whenever time permits, and on average, about 39% of boats have vegetation upon leaving the water body. We know that Manasquan seems to have more vegetation, as we know that there is a very large infestation of hydrilla right at the boat launch, and Spruce Run has a little bit less vegetation at the boat launch itself, so that's more likely why we're seeing more at Manasquan itself. And so I mentioned that there are just a few required questions on the survey, and we do train our stewards. We teach them that the questions are really conversational starting points to flow with the conversation, allow the stewards to make the survey their own, kind of get into their own flow while still gathering the information that we're asking for. And this may be a different approach compared to some other steward programs, but we do stress that in New Jersey at this time, this is a voluntary survey and inspection. It's not required by anyone, and the boaters can opt out at any time. So we just try to keep it a little bit more casual where we can to kind of keep the boaters engaged. Generally, about 80% of boaters surveyed have been aware of AIS, and the steward program has really provided an opportunity for valuable dialogue between the patrons and the parks, as well as the parks and the Water Supply Authority. So I'll dive into a few of the specific questions that we ask and the data that we have collected over the years. Since we have 3 years of Manasquan, it does provide a bigger sampling data set. So motorboats have had one of the highest rates of attached vegetation, pretty much due to all the crevices that you can find in places for vegetation to hide. And the percentages of rowboats here is probably just due to a small sample size. But most of the launching detections that we have included hydrilla, Eurasian water milfoil, or benthic filamentous algae. We find it a lot of time at both of these reservoirs that boats are just staying within the same reservoir, so they may leave and go home, but they are coming back to Manasquan if they left from Manasquan last. or they are coming back to Spruce Run in the same thing. But some of these boats have brought vegetation with them, and their last known location was Florida, the Great Lakes, or Pennsylvania. And similar rate of detection coming in from boats on Spruce Run. So this is Manasquan. Overall, about we're seeing about 5%. Spruce Run, it's a little bit less at 3.5% detection of all boats. And when we do dive into the raw data, we can see changes even throughout the year. Typically, we don't see vegetation on boats early in the season, which is a good time for education and discussion. And then while late July, August detection, that rate of vegetation found on boats is higher. And so also, once you have a few years of data, you can hopefully track patterns in awareness and knowledge, and then in turn, hopefully behavior change. So the first year of this program, we asked this question a little bit differently, so it didn't lend itself to adding a 3-year data set to track any patterns. But even just in this short amount of time, I think we are showing here that there is an increase in boaters that are aware of AIS in the reservoir, even if they can't remember the name, as the overall no's have decreased from 33% to 11% in just that 1 year. And also slightly more boaters are aware of hydrilla in the reservoir, as you can see, going from 24 to 27%, and that's possibly a shift from Eurasian water milfoil, which they often use as the default common species that boaters identify with. And so asking about measures to prevent the spread of AIS, this is a question that we believe the data is indicative of a behavior change from information they've learned from the stewards. We do ask in detail about what type of cleaning is utilized by the boat owner, whether that be rinsing a boat, washing with detergent, or just a visual inspection. And there was a pretty significant jump in boaters that rinsed their boats from the program's inception in 2019 to 2020. There was a slight decrease in 2021, and that 2020 jump could be indicative of a few things. It was the first summer of the pandemic, where people were probably generally cleaning things more, or that during the summer people were traveling more frequently between other water bodies and were actually cleaning their boats. As many boaters are frequently returning to the same boat launch spot, we think it's pretty rewarding to see that many boaters are actually practicing boat cleaning and self-inspections as time goes on. So in addition to cleaning practices, we also track when the boat was last used. So those used within the last week could still have viable plant fragments on them. And at Manasquan, this accounts for about 48% of launching boats. So this question is a great conversation starter to encourage cleaning, especially when boats visit multiple water bodies in a short amount of time. And then we also ask where the boat was last used. And this allows us to create these really cool spider maps to track the potential transference of AIS between water bodies. This is also a great time to plug the second webinar in this series with John Marino to show you how to create these maps to visualize boater movement. So make sure if you're interested in creating maps like this, that you tune in on the 22nd for that technical workshop. So by tracking where boaters have been recently, we can look to understand what AIS are in those frequently visited places for early detection in our water bodies, and hopefully can coordinate it with partners who manage those other water bodies as well. The spider map that you're seeing here is showing where boats came from prior to encountering our boat stewards at both Spruce Run in the northwest corner of the state and then Manasquan down on the coast. The red and orange lines are indicating boats traveling more frequently between those water bodies, more boats that are traveling between those water bodies and other water bodies in the state. And for us, we noticed that we have a high transference of boats between Manasquan, which has hydrilla, to Spruce Run and Round Valley, both of which do not have known hydrilla populations. We also know that many boaters from Manasquan have also recently visited other water bodies with known hydrilla infestations. So if we do decide to pursue an eradication effort at Manasquan, we know we must address the boating community for a successful eradication program. And regionally, these spider maps can give us an indication of other AIS that may be coming in from out of state. The map on the left is showing boat traffic to Manasquan, and then the one on the right is showing boat traffic to Spruce Run. Through the Northeast APMS and the Mid-Atlantic panel on AIS, I have contacts in the other states that I can gather information from about any of these certain water bodies and share information with them on boater movement. The limitation of these maps is they don't capture the high percent of boaters that do most frequently return to the same body of water. And at Manasquan, that is about 25% of boats and 46% at Spruce Run. And we're also looking to better understand our target audience, primarily fishermen, and are they perceiving any changes that may result from our management efforts? When we started the Boat Steward program in 2019, we received a lot of comments that our hydrilla management efforts were negatively impacting the fishing. We were only treating about 4 acres around the boat launch and 6 acres in another far corner of the 770-acre reservoir, so 10 acres out of 770, but the perception was that we were managing the whole thing. So we did not treat for hydrilla in 2020, but the anglers predominantly rated the fishing as the same. So there was some confusion about how this question is being asked. So we are still working about the optimal way to ask this question and have more recently switched to a 5-star rating system. This is a subjective question, and I'm definitely not the expert in social science. I'll leave that for the next presenter to address. And what else can we do with this data? One of the questions that we're asking is, would you use a boat watch station if one was provided? Patrons are overwhelmingly responding with yes. So the authority and park partners are exploring boat launch wash stations to be installed at the boat launch stations as a result. So we are looking to collaborate with other boat steward programs to share data to further track patterns and aid in early detection and rapid response efforts. The only other place in New Jersey that I know of that has a boat steward program is at Lake Hopatcong, which is the state's largest lake and is very popular for recreation. We hope that we can encourage more partners in New Jersey and surrounding states to start boat steward programs. And as Ben Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And at the low cost of having a seasonal boat steward part-time, that's about $5,000 to $7,000 a season. If they prevent just one new thing from entering our reservoirs or going somewhere else, they're going to be extremely cost-effective and worthwhile. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the New York State DEC for their guidance in developing our boat steward program and our amazing project partners at Monmouth County Park System, the Manasquan Reservoir, and the New Jersey State Park Service Spruce Run Recreation Area. And most of all, I'd like to say thank you to Kyle Clonan, who is the project lead for our boat steward program. He does everything from steward recruitment, interviews, training, equipment needs, survey oversight, swag purchases, data analysis, and maintaining continuous lines of communication with the stewards all summer long. And our program would not be possible without him. So you should really contact him with any questions that you have. But I will also leave you with my contact information for any questions you have too. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Heather. So next up, we have Tim Campbell. So let's see if we can get Tim.
Hey, hello everyone. Just working through like the one online platform I rarely use. So
Okay, it's all good. We have extra time.
Perfect. And
yeah.
Do we have a full presentation screen?
Not yet, no.
No, not yet. Okay, well that's fun.
If you can you try the little screen at the bottom right? Is it not? Okay, it seems like there's a bit of a delay. It's not working. Okay.
Yeah, it's on my end. It says it's on air showing application.
Oh, I can see the screen, but it's not full screen. It's actually your display screen with your slides on the left. There we go. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So let me go ahead and introduce you. Thanks, Tim. Okay.
Yep.
So Tim Campbell is an aquatic invasive species outreach specialist for the University of Wisconsin Sea Grant Institute and the National AIS Liaison for the NOAA Sea Grant Program under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He supports AIS prevention, outreach, communications, and program evaluation, and works to apply university and sea grant resources to AIS issues. Thanks, Tim. Take it away.
Thanks, Kathy, and thank you everyone for giving us your time today to talk about some really cool projects. I'm excited to talk to you all about our Great Lakes Interjurisdictional GLRI Boater Behavior Change Project. I think Heather really built me up as somebody that might be able to answer some social science questions. I think I at best refer to myself as a hobbyist social scientist, so I'll do my best. But if anyone has any real social science questions that I can't answer, I am definitely going to be happy to track down those answers for you all. So I think before we dive into the larger interjurisdictional project that all of us Great Lakes states are working on, I think it's good to I guess maybe step back and just talk about surveys and what we've done in Wisconsin, because I think that at least helps frame the project for me and understand the utility of it a little bit more. So in general, a lot of us are doing surveys for our watercraft inspection and boater outreach programs. And these surveys of boaters help us evaluate our prevention and outreach programs. I mean, it's how we get the data to understand if what we're doing is working. Most of the time, this is happening like at the point of access when we're doing the inspection anyway. I think just about every inspection program collects some sort of data. In Wisconsin, we're a little bit different because our program doesn't have any like enforcement authority or anything along those lines. So our program is purely educational. We used to collect a little bit more data, but for a handful of reasons we don't. So it's mostly us having educational conversations with boaters, but we do try to collect a little bit of data just to try to understand what's going on. So this is in contrast to kind of a more academic, rigorous, randomized like mail or online survey where you print out 10 pages of some stuff and mail it to people or email it to people. And so, what most people are doing are these in-person surveys, which are incredibly convenient, and you can get a lot of data from them because you already have a watercraft inspector at the landing talking to boaters, helping them clean their boats, educating them. And so you might as well just ask them a few questions and get that data. So, and you get a ton of data. I think you get on Wisconsin DNR's website, you can see we're inspecting, I think, more than 100,000 boats. I think more than 150,000 boats each year. New York is inspecting a lot of boats. New Jersey is inspecting a lot of boats. So you're getting a lot of data with every inspection, and that's great. Unfortunately, all of that data might not say as much about our boating population as we would like it to be. It's probably not representative of the average boater on the average day in, say, Wisconsin, because we're only getting inspections where there are watercraft inspectors, and then those watercraft inspectors are talking to a lot of the same boaters that boating on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So we're not really getting a good cross section of the entire boating population. We would guess that the results we're getting from our in-person surveys are probably rosier than what actually exists, because these are people that are used to talking to inspectors. They're in a place where AIS prevention is emphasized, and in Wisconsin with 2,000 plus lakes with public access and then way more access points, we can't be everywhere. What can be difficult too with these in-person surveys is just you might not get a lot of data per survey. You might get a lot of data, I guess a lot of individual boaters that you're talking to, but you might only have a minute to ask them questions. So you're only getting maybe the most important things. And for in-person surveys, randomized can be really difficult. We have tried to do this in Wisconsin, which is a whole separate 15 to 20 minute presentation, but in short, it either requires a lot of coordination time up front and then something always fails, or you probably need to hire 3 or 4 people to randomize it in a way that the results are generalizable across the state. In contrast to some of our mail surveys, and now we're transitioning a little bit to online surveys as well. These are easy to replicate methods. You can read them in the methods paper of a paper, which is what I have done for Wisconsin survey. I just read exactly what the person did in 2014, and it was very easy to just repeat that. And because what we're doing is taking a randomized sample of registered boaters in Wisconsin, this is representative. Our social science team, both at the DNR and the university, says this is the best way to do this to get generalizable information. So as long as we have access to that sample of people, or we can get that random pool of people, it's an easy way to get a representative sample. And another plus to this is that a small team or even one person can do this whole thing. So this doesn't require us to have inspectors everywhere asking questions, or I don't have to hire a person all summer to go to specific boat landings at specific times to get this data. I could theoretically do this, or me and some people that are really good at mailing stuff and analyzing data. And for these mail and online formats, we can also get people to stick around a little bit longer through incentives and a good kind of survey lead-in wording. So we can get people to answer maybe 15 minutes of questions, which can get us a lot more data that we can then understand our boaters a little bit better. Some downsides to this are some upfront printing and mailing costs. I think some people, well, when I do this in Wisconsin, we send out surveys to 1,500 registered voters in Wisconsin. I think we end up having about $8,000 in printing and mailing costs, which seems like a little bit of money up front, but when we kind of go in the back end and look at how much coordination time and all this kind of stuff that our watercraft inspector coordinator spends trying to do the voter behavior study, we probably break even. And then this isn't too much of a problem in Wisconsin, but in other states it can be difficult just getting the sample of registered voters. Not everyone can just go to the Wisconsin DNR and get a random poll of voters. And so depending on who you are, you might have more difficulty getting those samples. So how have we used this data in Wisconsin? So we've done this survey in 2009, 2013, and 2018. And here's just a little clip from the 2013 report, which just looks a lot better than the 2018 one. But we're able to go back in time and compare every couple of years to how our voters have followed laws, what their awareness is, and what actions they've been taking. And so, from 2009 to 2013, things have generally improved across, all of our clean, drain, dry behaviors. But something that, we keyed in on in 2013 was that people still weren't quite as good with some of our water laws, such as transporting like their fish they've caught that they were taking home to clean. They're still transporting that in live wells with water, or transporting fish in buckets of water. Like there was a disconnect that they knew they couldn't transport water home and they needed to drain their boat, but it was still quote unquote okay if they had fish in it, which is not what we want them to do. So with this data, we knew that that was a very specific action we wanted to target. So we came up with using community-based social marketing principles, the drain campaign or the ice your catch campaign, where we've made ice packs with a message about draining water from live wells and buckets containing your catch. We hand out these ice packs. So not only are we really targeting this message, but we're providing a good alternate behavior for people after we're telling them not to do something. So to me, this is a really good example of how, if you collect this data in a good, rigorous, generalizable way, there's very specific, new programs that you can develop based off of it. So that's what we've been doing in Wisconsin, which, I think as we're all trying to talk across states, we're all trying to talk about what's working, what isn't working. We want to compare approaches, we want to compare approaches across states, but this can all be really difficult because some states invest more in valuation and others just don't have the funding, don't have the capacity, don't have the time to invest in evaluation. So it's just been a little bit more difficult than we'd like to learn across states. And in 2014, there was a meeting, a Great Lakes Aquatic Nuisance Species panel meeting, where some panel members pulled together a lot of this information from different surveys across states, where we were able to, use different assessments to try to compare. But again, difficulty with this was that we were asking different questions with slightly different populations. So things weren't really apples to oranges for our comparison, or sorry, they were apples to oranges for comparisons. We wanted apples to apples. So again, we had all these great evaluations, but because everything wasn't done in a standardized way, it was still tough to figure out what we could learn all from each other. So, I guess bringing this point home again, and I already said some of this stuff, but so we can learn a lot, or we can learn a little across different efforts, but when we do things slightly differently, it's apples to oranges, so what we can learn is a little bit limited. But with the standard methods and approaches, we can better guide future work, make this stuff easier to implement, and make it easier to learn from each other. So a lot of us within the Great Lakes region that are interested in these sorts of things thought that this was a great idea to pursue. So thanks to an interjurisdictional program with Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding through the Fish and Wildlife Service, we established a voter behavior change working group that aims to publish a literature review of voter behavior change information that's accessible to AIS managers, not just something published in a journal with a lot of academic language. We want something that's easy to kind of grasp by everyone. We want to establish consistent social science methods for evaluating voter behaviors in regards to AIS throughout the Great Lakes. And ideally, we would create methods that can be used in places other than the Great Lakes Basin as well, if we do things the right way. And then we're also meeting quarterly using an online format, and hopefully once per year in person once this whole pandemic thing is done, if it's ever done. So for implementing consistent voter behavior change surveys, so some states, like we've talked about, have been doing some of these evaluations, but there have been a few states, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, that have, it's been, I think, at least 10 plus years since they've implemented a survey like this. So we have funding to implement surveys in these states to try to understand some of their voter behaviors and knowledge. And then we want to compare these results to recently completed surveys and work in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and New York, and then release all the information in one comprehensive report again, so we can all do a better job of comparing across our programs. And this is not a novel idea. Nothing I do is novel. So I think this idea had been talked about a lot. I think in, like between 2005 and 2010, as people's AIS programs were starting to get started, and especially the Mississippi River Basin panel on ANS, they funded a lot of state surveys using a relatively standard method that the MRBP states developed. But over time, some of the language started to deteriorate. People wanted to add more specific questions, and the whole thing just kind of fell apart because people's desire to customize things a little bit. So we're trying to think about that a little bit ahead of time. And so, for example, while all of our states might have very specific language on, I guess, what our guidance is. I said clean, drain, dry earlier, but Wisconsin doesn't technically use clean, drain, dry. We use inspect, remove, drain, never move, which I've had to say like thousands of times, so it rolls off my tongue quickly, like clean, drain, dry. But Minnesota uses clean, drain, dry, dispose. Colorado, clean, drain, dry, decontaminate. So we might want to ask different things because these are what our laws state, or this is what our specific guidance is. But we can always, maybe look at things more of like a regional level and try to understand, are voters taking the recommended prevention actions? Because we're essentially all asking them to do the same things, just in different language. And the same with logos. Wisconsin invests a lot in stop aquatic hitchhikers, Minnesota and clean in, clean out, Colorado, clean, drain, dry. They're all generally the same message. And so we could be asking, do voters recognize the statewide outreach brand? So we can figure out, even if we're comparing across logos, maybe we can still understand if certain methods are working better than others, regardless of what brand we're using. So we can get around this customization issue with a little bit of thought and kind of a bigger picture idea of what we're interested in. There's also funding in the project for determining needs for AIS message testing work with some partners, some real social science partners from the Department of Life Sciences Communication at UW-Madison. We recently published a paper on invasive species message frames, and we used a pretty easy to use message testing feature that Facebook has, but there's other ways you can do this on social media or like paid survey platforms like Qualtrics. But we want to work with this working group too to identify message testing needs and do similar message tests, because I think there's a lot of variations of messages and message frames that we use that are sometimes informed by theory, sometimes we just think they might work better, but there are now really easy ways to test these to see which actually do work better and get people to click for more information or make them feel something that would make them more likely to clean their boat. So we'd like to explore some of that too with our voter behavior change project, which we will have some ideas of what we might need to explore based off of the results of our survey. So here's our proposal timeline. We got off to a little bit of a late start, and so I'd say we are like probably 9 months into it, and I think mostly on track. You can't see me shoulder shrugging, but I'll let you know, instead of looking at our timeline, just seeing what we've done so far is probably more useful. So on the left is what we've done so far. On the right is our working group of people that are participating in the project and helping out with things. So for the literature review, last summer we had a UW-Madison Nelson Institute student help us out with the literature review. So we have most of the papers that cover boater behavior change, as well as understanding kind of boater behaviors, and even some literature just on recreational watercraft as a pathway of AIS. And we have it written up in kind of a first draft of an annotated bibliography. So we definitely want to keep that product, and maybe if we can try to do some synthesis on that and just something more polished over the next few months. We also have a collection of the regional and statewide boater surveys that have been completed since 1994. A lot of these haven't been published in peer-reviewed literature, so it took a lot of digging in survey centers and libraries to find these, but we got a lot of them, which is pretty exciting, at least if this is what you think about. And we also have a separate survey team that's been meeting to work on the actual draft of the survey instrument. So we have a first draft of that. We're going through some revisions right now. We've also been meeting with individual states to try to build capacity for new partnerships to do some of the social science in the Great Lakes region, because in the past, maybe a single survey center based out of one state's done all this, which can lead to some efficiencies and like streamlining the process, but it doesn't quite build capacity across all of our states to do this work on our own if we would ever like to do that. So how you might be able to use some of these efforts if you are not a social scientist, or you're doing really anything and you want to understand boater behavior a little bit better. So something we hope to be able to let people do soon is just check out some of the boater behavior change literature we have, look at the annotated bibliography, just get a feel for some of the things that have already been done and published, so we can learn from that. And we hope that the standard survey tool that we create could be used for assessments with maybe a little bit of modification at any scale. So I think the previous presentation did a really good job of focusing on the lakes they were asking questions at. So if you're running watercraft inspections or want to understand boaters at a lake or two, you should still be able to use this survey if you would like to better understand those boaters. And then hopefully all of this data can inform new program development and behavior change campaigns. And then over the course of the next year, we'll be hopefully developing some messaging guidance so we can all have better, more clear, more actionable communications for people. So at that, my contact information is below, and I look forward to the discussion here in 20 minutes. Thank you.
Everybody's under time, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
So the next person up is Ceci Wybert. Looks good.
Think we should be good?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So let me introduce you. Ceci is the project manager for the Great Lakes Commission's Aquatic Invasive Species Program. In this role, she serves as coordinator of the Great Lakes Panel on Aquatic Nuisance Species, as well as lead for the Blue Accounting AIS issue, and manages a variety of interjurisdictional invasive species projects, including this one. She holds a master's degree in coastal zone management, as well as a bachelor's degree in maritime affairs and policy from the University of Miami in Florida. Thanks, Ceci. Take it away.
Thanks, Kathy, and thank you again for giving us the opportunity to share our projects today. I'm glad that Tim somewhat covered the interjurisdictional project concept, because this is another one from the Great Lakes. So if I can advance my slides. So what is the Great Lakes AIS Landing Blitz? I took a peek at the registration list ahead of this webinar, and I did notice that there are some project partners registered. So for those of you that are on the call, preemptive thank you for all your great work on this project. And for those of you that are not located in the Great Lakes or haven't heard about this project before, you may have similar landing blitz events in your jurisdiction, but in the Great Lakes, this is a primarily outreach-based effort. There's some legal inspections and regulatory work that's going on alongside, but as Tim noted, with how Wisconsin frames their inspections, the landing blitz is really an opportunity to engage boaters, educate them, about this pathway, about what species might be moving through this pathway, and empower those boaters to, take steps to prevent movement and spread of invasive species through this pathway. So on the left there is an awesome volunteer from Wisconsin. The middle icon is from Pennsylvania Sea Grant, and that Boaters Steer Clear cartoon is from the Ontario Ministry of Northern Development and Mines, and I'm immediately blanking on their full name, so they just changed it, so forgive me. But prior to 2019, these landing blitz events were coordinated individually within each jurisdiction. So I mentioned that some of you all on this webinar might have similar events in your own state, province, or locality. Same in the Great Lakes. Different states were putting on these events sort of as an ad hoc basis, trying to accomplish similar goals, but without any significant regional coordination. So under the leadership of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, the first regionally coordinated landing blitz event was held in 2019. And what this looked like in 2019 was just getting the state AIS coordinators and some of their outreach leads from Sea Grant on a call together, agreeing on at least a similar date period that our events would take place. That generally occurs over the period of Canada Day and the 4th of July. So that's July 1st and 4th. So usually try to bookend that period with either weekend. So it usually ends up being about a 10-day period. Jurisdictions can host and do host landing blitz events outside of that 10-day period, but for the purposes of this regionally coordinated effort, we wanted to really hone in on one period where we can all be out at the same time, regardless of what jurisdiction you're in, and share the same messaging and all work towards the same goal. So between 2019 to 2020, there's some figures on the slide here. I'm not going to read them out to you, but we talked to a lot of people. A lot of inspections were conducted, legal inspections, I should say, legislative defined inspections, and a bunch of people were on social media. And that social media figure I personally find to be something that's been really impressive about this effort, in that obviously 2020 and a little bit of 2021, we had to quick pivot from these in-person events where folks usually like head out to boat ramps and actually are talking to people. With COVID and with a lot of the uncertainty, especially in 2020, just surrounding how to keep yourself safe and be protective while still potentially being around other people. Most jurisdictions opted not to do in-person events, and so we really quick shifted to focus on social media, and we had huge success with that. I was very surprised. So how we've built on that first sort of call of just getting folks together and making sure that we're all out on boat launches at the same dates, we've really emphasized communication and messaging. So part of that COVID shift in 2020, but also just trying to continually improve with each event each year. One of the primary tools and efforts that we have done as a region is to develop messaging guides and social media guides, so that when we have press releases that go out, if there's media coverage, social media posts, webinars, any sort of virtual events like that, everybody has the same playbook of here's a template for an Instagram post. Here is a Dropbox folder with a bunch of images and videos about boats so that you can attach them to a social media post, or you can share this in your own like promotional material. So trying to bring everybody in line from a messaging perspective has been our focus for the past couple of years. So none of this work was externally funded in terms of the regional coordination. We have a small amount through the Great Lakes Commission and the Great Lakes Panel of funding available for general AIS regional coordination activities. But in terms of actual activities and what was taking place, that was all managed internally within each jurisdiction's relevant agencies. And so this is what that ends up looking like in terms of locations. the Great Lakes Commission manages an event website where we have jurisdictions submit their event location information, and we put up this really nifty little map that shows interested folks or visitors sort of where can you expect to see folks out at boat launches during this 10-day period. And as you can probably tell from this map, there's a huge concentration in the upper Great Lakes states, not as much in the lower Great Lakes states, and not as much in Canada. And so looking at this map, this really sort of prompted for us, okay, we really got ourselves situated with messaging, with outreach. We've done a really great job of doing that, you know, sort of on our own time and through our own agency funding. But it would be really great if we had some additional external funding where we could beef up this map and actually get more bodies out at boat ramps, talking to people, educating boaters, and spreading that, as Tim again noted, sort of outreach-based inspection messaging. So that leads us to the interjurisdictional Great Lakes AIS landing blitz that I was asked to speak about today. I spent a lot of time talking about background because our project period just started about a month and a half ago. So I do have a brief update on where things stand there. But in terms of the project objectives themselves, our first objective is to improve capacity for boat inspections and in-person outreach. Given the differences in the legal framework that exist within each of the Great Lakes jurisdictions, just in terms of what an inspection entails, the legal definition, who is legally allowed to conduct an inspection, what sort of training is required for that. We didn't want to wade into that and make the terms of this grant more complicated than they needed to be. So for this objective, we, through the Great Lakes Commission, will be distributing a request for proposals for a small grants program of up to $10,000 per applicant to go out physically at a boat launch and do these educational-based inspections. So not just handing out flyers, not just, you know, having a sandwich board saying clean, drain, dry, but this is to fund folks actually walking up to boaters, talking to them, educating them about the pathway, and then physically walking around a boat, pointing at different places on a boat where that boater should check, educating them about how do you clean a boat, how do you disinfect, what's the appropriate sort of protocol for moving between bodies of water. So it is intended to be a really intensive education opportunity. So for this first objective, that's our goal, is to just get more bodies out there, talk to more people, and really beef up that location map that I showed on the prior slide. Our second objective is to expand outreach efforts through mass and social media. As a 20-something millennial woman, this is what I'm personally very excited about. And again, our project team members that are on the call have heard me wax poetic about how excited I am about this. This is an opportunity for us as a project team to really dive into some more dynamic outreach tools. So again, not just fact sheets, not just social media posts, not just media interviews, but looking at developing public service announcements. Pennsylvania Sea Grant put together a really slick PSA that they've run for the past 2 years that includes information about the event and B-roll about how you inspect a boat, and talks about the importance of managing the pathway and how boaters can get involved. So we want to build on that and try to develop some PSAs that can be played across at a regional scale with some minor adjustments based on the jurisdiction. As Tim noted, not everyone says clean, drain, dry, so we have to make sure that our outreach messaging of those products matches the outreach campaigns in each jurisdiction. But that's a primary goal of us for this second objective. We're also investigating working with influencers, which is something that sort of rose to the top of the mossball situation. If folks remember from last year, there was this scare about mossballs being contaminated with zebra mussels and quagga mussels in pet stores, and through Fish and Wildlife Services, communications and outreach that was picked up by some water garden aquarium YouTubers and TikTokers, and they were talking about it and sharing that information, and that was shared with us as sort of a wow, like look at this untapped market or method for outreach and communication, especially as technology continues to evolve. And folks who are on those platforms are increasingly the folks that are applying for boating and fishing licenses and registrations. So investigating sort of what that might look like if we were to intentionally contract or work with some influencers, run some YouTube ads, do sponsored videos, things like that, really bringing outreach into 2022. And then our final project objective is to develop tools to recruit and retain local event partners. We recognize this funding, it's not going to be available forever. For us, it's only available for 2 years. So we're going to do the most that we can with the funding that we have available to us over the next 2 years. But we want to also make sure that as part of this effort, we are putting in place the foundations that our project partners and state partners would require to continue to recruit local event partners. So if I'm a state AIS coordinator and I'm going to a lake association or conservation management area, and I want to try to recruit them to participate in this 10-day event period, what sort of materials do we need to have to, sort of generate that interest? What questions would be useful to answer up front? What sort of training or guidance materials should we be providing to make that transition as smooth as possible? Something I forgot to mention for the first project objective is that we are planning to do for subrecipients a virtual training on how do you approach boaters, how do you talk them through a visual inspection. And so one of our plans is to record those virtual trainings and put together training modules under Project Objective 3 that can be used into the future and throughout our Canadian partner locales as well. I was remiss to mention, given that this is funding through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and US federal funds, the project objectives only apply to locations within the US. But recognizing that the Great Lakes are a binational body of water and that AIS don't respect political boundaries, we want to make sure that any products that are developed in coordination and conjunction with these US-based activities can be used across the border and would be applicable there as well. So in terms of just where we stand now after the first month and a half of the project period, we have an RFP that's been drafted for Objective 1. It's in the final stages of review. We expect that to be distributed by the end of February, hoping to close that sometime in April and get those small grants out in mid-May for activities covering June to August, but including and required that 10-day event period. For Objective 2, we are currently investigating media marketing companies to develop this PSA and doing some work to investigate TikTok and YouTuber partnerships with some Midwest personalities, I guess I would say. So not necessarily boating specific influencers, but trying to identify who's a common voice that people will relate to and identify with. So that is where things stand there. And oh, yep, here's all the stuff that I just talked through. So don't know my own slides. And then, yeah, finally, our project team structure, it's comprised of representatives from the Great Lakes states and tribes. They make decisions and guide implementation of project activities and participate in subrecipient selection. So that's facilitated through the Great Lakes panel on the existing project team structure from past Great Lakes AIS Landing Blitz events, and then the Great Lakes Commission and panel staff sort of do the underlying framework of work in between those items. So that's it.
All right, wow, okay, you're quite a bit under, thank you, that's awesome. That means we have more time for questions. Okay, so Amy, would you mind switching to my screen?
Coming your way, Kathy.
Thank you. So I don't know if speakers would like to put their cameras on so we can watch them. Well, not watch you, sorry, see you while you're answering questions. Hello, Heather. So let's see, first questions in the list here. We have a question about, for Heather, sorry, the percent of AIS on the non-powered boats were higher than might be expected, though still low. Were any of these associated with trailers used to transport these boats to the launch?
So we don't parse out trailers from boats in our surveys, and typically only powered boats have trailers. Even people with kayaks typically pull their cars right up to the boat launch. So there's very few hand carts for kayaks and canoes. But vegetation on trailers for power boats would still be included in any survey results. So hopefully that answers that.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Tim. How do you measure / confirm drying before launching, and do you inspect residual water for AIS?
For our Wisconsin inspections, we just ask people if we're doing an inspection before they're launching, because we both do before and after. Well, before launching and then when they're leaving, we just ask if they dried. So, or for dried for a handful of days. So I think that's the best we can do there. And then if people are getting an inspection when they're leaving, our inspectors will, I'm not as familiar with our protocol as I should be. I'm pretty sure they will ask if they can look inside the boat. They'll point out live wells, transom wells, any place that could hold water, and let them know that they should be drying those. But they're not getting into the boats to do any of that stuff.
Okay. Then we have another comment for you, Tim. Thank you very much, Tim. Your knowledge and the way you share it is wonderful. So there you go.
Thank you. Makes me feel good. Needed that win.
So then we have a question for Ceci. Communication / messaging is great, but only if the education is learned and implemented. What data are available on the learned implemented results?
So that is not something that is under the auspices of this project. Our primary goal is just to get people out and on boat launches. And so we're relying on projects like the one that Tim is leading to fill in that backside of behavior change and evaluation. So trying not to do everything all in one project and recognizing the strengths of our partners on that.
Thanks, Ceci. So that is all. Go ahead, sure.
Can I jump in and maybe add some, I guess, additional information there? So I think some of what we might be getting at with that question is obviously when you hand people a flyer or show them a billboard or something, they don't learn everything that we need them to know based off of that single interaction. So what we're trying to do with kind of the message testing part of the boat behavior change project, and then the AIS metaphor paper, and things that social scientists before me have been doing, is just trying to link messaging with certain like feelings or beliefs that are linked to behavior change. For example, this is the only theory of behavior I'm familiar with, but I know two, but the theory of planned behavior. And so if we start looking at like social norms and feelings of self-efficacy, we know that some of these things are linked with actually doing a behavior. Like if you believe that the thing you're doing makes a difference, or that you can do, like I can clean my boat, I have the tools to clean my boat, it matters, everyone else is doing it. We know that when people feel those things, they're more likely to do the behavior. And I can't measure that, I gave somebody a brochure and they clean their boat, but I can measure how people feel about the messages on the brochure, that it makes them feel the right social norms. It makes them feel like they have control over those behaviors, which are then linked to behavior. So maybe that's getting into the weeds a little bit, but I think that's what we're trying to do with some of that, to try to better link our outreach, outreach messages with actual behavior change.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So the next question is for Heather. Can you elaborate on the FAST survey? What information is collected, and when analyzing data, how do you combine the two data sets?
So I'd have to go back to all the specific questions, but I think we're, typically just, trying to gather, has the boat been somewhere else, and how frequently, how recently, but otherwise, just kind of basic information, what type of boat is it, and then just let the people get back out on the water. And we do, as I said, in Survey 123, it does create an Excel spreadsheet that you can export. And then we kind of combine all the Excel spreadsheets. And then we just know that there are going to be gaps in some of the other questions that we'd be asking. And then we can still analyze at least whatever information we can get with that fast survey. And there's been, I think there's been, let's see, I think we've done about 500 or so fast surveys over the past 3 years. So out of that 5,000, but that's, so it's a pretty good number that we've had of those fast surveys out of that, but we, know that we're not going to get all that information. And so even when we're looking at the larger data sets, that they're not complete with that.
Okay, thank you. Next question is for Tim. How do we find out when the lit review that you mentioned will be available?
I would check with your state AIS coordinator that would be participating in the project or know about it. And then hopefully when that is done, we can share that across all our project participants, and then they can share it with any statewide or kind of local partners or people that might be interested in it. You can also always just send me an email too, and I can put it down on a list of people to notify when we have a good shareable product for people. I'm also, like, if you're looking at pulling together a grant and you need some of these resources, I have folders of all of this stuff too. So if some of that stuff is useful now, I'm also happy to just kind of share all the raw materials I have too.
Okay, question for Ceci. What is the title of the Pennsylvania Sea Grant resource piece that you mentioned?
I just sent the link to Amy, and I'm pretty sure she just posted it in the chat. So folks should be able to see it there. It doesn't have a formal name other than PSA, I think.
Thank you. So another question for you. What is the most impactful outreach avenue that you have identified so far? Specifically with social media, I'm curious about your tactics for expanding your reach as far as possible.
Yeah, I don't know if this is exactly answering the question that's being asked, but in my mind, one of the best things that we did was using a common hashtag across all of the jurisdictions and across all of the posts and across all social media platforms. So anything that was being posted on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, we even made LinkedIn guides. I don't think anyone used them, but they all use the same hashtag GLAIS Blitz. And so that allowed, folks who interacted with that tweet or that post or that video, because that hashtag was part of that post that they interacted with, whether it's a like, a comment, a share, whatever, the social media algorithms will then promote other posts that have that hashtag. So someone in Pennsylvania who interacted with a Pennsylvania Sea Grant post might come across, like on Instagram or Twitter, a post from Minnesota that has different information in it, but still uses that same hashtag. Or if folks want to learn more or get more exposure, they can just click on a hashtag and everything's organized right there. So taking advantage of the social media algorithm and making it work for you, I think was one of the really critical, successful pieces of our outreach. And Tim looks like he wants to say something else.
I mean, I'm always happy to talk social media. So I think if you're doing kind of, it's like nuanced, like paid, unpaid, like paid people are coordinating this stuff, but let's just say you're trying to do organic stuff. I think what Ceci was talking about was like right on the mark, but I've had some success with like paid advertising, both on Google Ads, YouTube, and Facebook. And I don't think it takes very much money to really expand your reach beyond some of the people that you might already be reaching with your pages to people that you can target based off of interest. So if you have just $15 or $20, I think you can do some really effective paid advertising to expand your reach. And then some of that stuff has benefits beyond your advertising because you're increasing your pages following usually when you're doing these paid efforts. So I wouldn't be afraid of that. And I'd really consider it if you have a little bit of money to spend on it.
And that's definitely in our plan for this upcoming round of social media outreach.
Okay. So next question is not directed to any particular person, but it's a question about who's collecting the hard science data on AIS prevention. So I guess the question I really need to ask is, what is defined as hard science data? So anyone have an opinion about that, what that would be?
I mean, if hard science is more of like the physical science of like stuff on boats versus the social sciences of are people doing the things we want them to do? I think that there's been some work in the Western U.S. to talk about the effectiveness of like watercraft decontamination. There's been some work done by John Roethlisberger looking at boat cleaning, and then the Minnesota AIS Research Center has also been doing some of that stuff. So we pulled together a lot of that stuff for our literature review, and I'd be happy to share some of that with people.
And I also want to add that as part of the New York State DEC's Watercraft Inspection Steward Program app, they also collect data on interceptions and species found. So, okay. So
yeah,
next
I think I'll add that's something that I wish we had the capacity to do more of in the Great Lakes is that connectivity research in terms of what Heather presented and what New York has done in Minnesota AIS Research Center of pairing where boats are coming from and going to what species are located in which bodies of water, and then potentially using that as a way to either measure risk or track spread. That would be what I would consider hard science, and some of those efforts are underway by folks who've already spoken today, but it's my 2 cents.
And I think one of the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay, Tim, go ahead.
Something that I'm always going to be really sad about was when GLRI first started, I don't know, more than 10 years ago. One of the things funded within Wisconsin was a 5-year intensive monitoring effort to try to track the spread and understand the rate of spread of aquatic invasive species in Wisconsin. That never got published. I have no idea why, because it was such a cool study. But over the 5 years, they monitored more than 200 lakes each year in Wisconsin, and the rate of spread wasn't increasing over the course of those 5 years, and only lakes that had public access points had invasive species. So if it was kind of a wilderness lake that you had to hike into, no invasive species. So that was definitely a cool study that indicated that it is humans moving things around, and that theoretically the rate of spread should be increasing, but some combination of our outreach programs are having an impact on what the spread is. So I feel pretty good about that. I'd feel better about it if it were published someplace.
Final question. Are boats tagged after going through inspection? Would tagging help with tracking? And could we see the link to the ArcGIS online spreadsheet?
I'm wondering if that's for me.
I suspect it is.
Yeah, and at this time we don't tag boats. That is something that we have looked at before, and are possibly considering. Especially, some of the boaters, as I said, we have a lot that come back to the same water body. We've got a lot of repeat boaters. Spruce Run has their own boat storage on site, so a lot of boaters, are just kind of trailering their boats just from over to the storage and back to the boat launch. So they've actually asked us for a tagging program so that they don't have to go through the survey again. They do seem to be happy to comply, but that is something that we have considered. There was a whole bunch of other questions there. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Would tagging help with tracking?
I think it could. I think it's, I think it would help with those, especially those repeat boaters and even those that are going between our certain water bodies. But it's hard because we only have two water bodies that we're doing steward programs at. But it could be a different way to keep track, especially between those water bodies. And I think there was one more part.
And could we see the link to the ArcGIS online spreadsheet?
I can, it's one of these that you have to have a login to our account. So I can't share that specifically, but it is, you know, the Survey 123 is a program that's out there with Esri. So I don't think I'm able to share that link to that. But I can pull it up, and if, you know, can share the screen in a couple minutes and see if you want to see what that looks like.
This was the last question. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add on the topic of boat tagging. Tim can probably correct me here if I get details wrong, but the Federal Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force just approved a set of voluntary recommendations and guidelines for boaters entering a water body and exiting a water body, and the inspection process and protocol. This was spearheaded by folks out west, to Tim's comment about all their really great work, sort of quantifying the impacts and successes of AIS prevention. And part of those guidelines are the concept of tags and reciprocity of tags. So if, you know, someone in New Jersey comes off of a boat launch, has an inspection, decontamination, they get it tagged, and then they boat somewhere in New York or Texas or California, ideally, based on these federal, you know, guidelines or not guidelines, recommendations, there would be reciprocity there between those inspection agencies of like, okay, I see this tag, I know that this was inspected in New Jersey, and I know that they, you know what they're doing, so we're gonna give them like a fast pass basically into the water. So that's something that's percolating right now at a federal scale, and some Western states are taking that approach. I don't know that that'll ever be a fully nationally implemented strategy, but it's something that's certainly interesting and at least could be, you know, considered for smaller or more regional scales if it's appropriate.
Have those guidelines been released yet? Is there a link that you could put in the chat for us?
They were approved at the last task force meeting, which was in November. I am not sure that I don't know that their materials have been published yet. Tim chairs the outreach committee, so maybe you know more.
I'm on, yeah, and that's the prevention committee. So
yeah.
But I'm on the task force website right now, and I don't see anything posted yet. I do know that the task force website, I think, needs updating, so they might not be posting new things if they can avoid, or yeah, if they can avoid posting new things, they might be waiting until the update's done.
I'll look for an update from Susan Pascoe.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have more questions for Ceci and Tim. Have you been able to measure to what degree social media impressions translate to behavioral shifts?
I think that's more of a Tim question.
I haven't heard that, or I don't have a great number for that. That is a little bit of what we were trying to get at with our message framing paper, and that I think we understand that it's not necessarily impressions and like billboarding that we're interested in. We're all interested in using our outreach funding for behavior change. So, you know, it's not, if you give me a lot of money, I can show people a lot of stuff on social media, you know, but it's, does the stuff we show them make them want to do something? And so we were really measuring with our message frame paper, like, are people clicking through to learn something? Are they talking about it because conversation can be good, or are they sharing it because that's like an endorsement of content? So we were trying to evaluate it in different ways. So hopefully, as we start looking to do some more of this evaluation, we're not just reporting impressions, which are useful and interesting and a good number to get, but, you know, are we showing people messages that we know, you know, are more likely to make them do something we want them to do?
And that's the plan for, or part of the plan for the Great Lakes AIS Landing Blitz as we go forward, is to take that really great message testing that Tim and others did and just published, and use that as a basis for how we develop our social media guides going forward. Because we recognize, you know, like Tim said, that impressions right now, there's not really a great way, unless you have a bunch of money, to go track down everybody that looked at an Instagram post and see if they're doing things differently. So being as efficient and I guess, intentional with our messaging as we can be, and doing what we know is going to make people feel the way that they should feel in order to take that action, is where we're trying to tie all that in together here now. So got to build the space first before you can try and figure out the top.
Thank you, Ceci. So the next question we have is, what would your suggestion be for private access lakes that do not have a public boat launch? How can we get towns, counties to become more proactive in raising public awareness of AIS?
I think a good place to start, and this might be where Tim's going to go to, is the Clean Drain Dry Initiative website. There are a lot of really excellent resources that are publicly accessible there. You can order fact sheets, bumper stickers, signs, whatever, as a very first starting point, at least having appropriate and accurate outreach messaging available so that people start to become exposed to those concepts would be probably the first place to start. And then just going from there and trying to establish those private public partnerships to maybe conduct some of your own landing blitz events that are really more focused on that boater education and visual inspection procedures. But it's a long way to get to that point. So starting with, just establishing that basis of outreach, I think would be my suggestion.
Do you have anything to add, Tim? Or Heather?
I guess I'm still maybe a little confused on a private launch that still has influence from towns and counties. That's blowing my mind a little bit. That apparently must exist because we have a lot of public access in Wisconsin. So that's what I'm stuck on. I did share the links to the Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers website and the Clean Drain Dry, the Clean Drain Dry Initiative website where you can get products. I think I'll just leave it at that. Anything more than that's rambling for me.
Stop Aquatic Hitchhikers is also definitely what I meant to say. So thank you, Tim, for knowing what I meant.
Okay. And I'm just going to chime in slightly and say maybe even reaching out to the state AIS coordinators would be helpful too, because oftentimes there's state products that can be distributed through towns and counties as well.
Yeah, and I guess that maybe reminds me. So I did spend some time working closely with the DNR to get materials at access points, and so even when we did have completely private launches, there's usually at least I had access to some pot of funding and some resources to help get outreach products at those sites. It might be signage or pamphlets or something like that. So it might not be a watercraft inspector. It might not be the most ideal prevention strategy, but you can usually, with the help of a statewide contact, get something there, because we understand that we don't want any lakes invaded with invasive species, because that's just another point for them to invade another lake. And anything we can do to get people taking action on any lake probably means they're going to be taking that action on other lakes too.
And I certainly can't speak for state AIS coordinators, and certainly don't know sort of the playing field outside of the Great Lakes. But Kathy, I think it would be fair to say that if lake associations or private launch points expressed interest to state AIS coordinators or AIS staff about some of these activities and how they can take on some of this outreach, that a state agency person would be excited to sort of delegate some of that information to a private entity. So that would be a really good resource.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. I actually have gone ahead and sent boxes of our tchotchkes to various private lakes on occasion when they ask for it. So we definitely, and we also provide support when they're talking through what it would look like to have a program at their lake. So we definitely get involved when asked to. Yes.
And maybe in 2 years, hopefully, not maybe, definitely, it's our objective, we'll have more concrete materials, at least in the Great Lakes region, for exactly that type of organization that wants to do something but isn't really sure where to start.
Okay. So we have a question for all presenters. do you think connecting with boat merchants to encourage boaters, especially new boaters, to be aware of AIS is a good way to go? Perhaps literature could be given to boat merchants to provide to those who are purchasing boats.
Kathy, I think you might be more versed in this response with your work with some of the manufacturers.
So what has been happening is I haven't worked with manufacturers, but the fisheries, our fisheries division, well, the fisheries bureau within the division of fish and wildlife have been reaching out to boat merchants and manufacturers regarding the water containing compartments and how to structure the boat so it's easier to clean and drain. So that's definitely something that has been in conversation through fisheries here, but I'm sure there's a lot more conversations that need to be had.
One of our very smart partners recently, this week recommended that we potentially think about looking at one of the state boat shows that happen where people are often buying a lot of these boats, and that may be a good place to start disseminating some information about this as well. So that's another option to get the word out.
That is something we do as well. So I would recommend that, yes.
And something that's been kind of in the works for a while, I think since 2014, is working with the American Boat and Yacht Council on a design standard, T32, design and construction and consideration of aquatic invasive species, working with boat manufacturers to better design watercraft to be AIS safe, that they have trailers that don't have plants attached to them, or they have live wells or wakeboard ballast containers that completely drain. And so there are they do all of the safety standards too, and there's some standards that are I think legally binding and others that are just recommendations. This AIS standard is just a recommendation, but it does have some design considerations and also a section on outreach and things that they can be doing to raise awareness kind of at the point of sale and throughout manufacturing. I am eagerly awaiting some evaluation to see how the industry has been using the standard, because I think it was approved in 2016 or 2017.
Would it be possible to share the link for that as well?
Yeah, I think I put that in the chat, and then I just realized that my chats only go to organizers and panelists, so not quite as helpful, but yeah, it's in the chat.
I've been sending them out for you, Tim.
Awesome, thank you.
So we have about 3 minutes left. Any other questions before we wrap up? Oh, we've got another one, okay. Does some of your outreach extend specifically to Native American communities and tribal land managers?
So that is a specific aspect of at least our interjurisdictional process. The funding as it comes through GLRI and Fish and Wildlife Service is specific to interjurisdictional coordination between states and tribes, not just between states. So we have engaged with tribal liaisons sort of at an initial scale, given that our project is just getting off the ground, but I know there's a lot of interest in this from some specific tribal communities, at least in Minnesota. Some of them have even purchased boat wash units. That's what I'm looking for. So, at least on the Great Lakes side and through this landing blitz, I think that the opportunity is ripe for continued participation there.
Any other final questions before we go? All right, so let's see if I can get my slides to move. I'm gonna switch them out, maybe, or maybe not. Okay.
Try the buttons on the bottom left, Kathy.
Bottom left.
There should be some barely visible. Yep, you're there.
Okay. So hopefully that will do it. Yes. So I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of the webinar, so I just wanted to say hello. I'm Kathy McLinn. My day job is AIS coordinator for New York State's DEC, and my side hustle is president of NEAPMS in 2020. And if you like what you've heard and seen today, please tune in for the next presentation on February 22nd, where we're going to provide a workshop on how to create spider maps to track boater movement across your state and state lines. So the registration for that is free, as was for this one. So please sign on there. And let's see, go to the next slide. Thank you very much for attending, and we hope that you'll check out the posting of the recordings that will be there sometime soon at www.neapms.org. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.